Ladies and gentlemen, language is not just a mirror of thought, it is its architecture. The modern writer, facing a digital avalanche of noise, must carve clarity with precision. We write not merely to impress, but to express, to push against the fog of jargon and cliché. Syntax is political, grammar power. Style is not decoration, it is revolution. When the sentence breathes, the mind wakes. And in that breath, we challenge conformity, resist passivity, and reclaim the dignity of human thought through prose. Style is a tool of clarity, not ornamentation. This idea cuts against the grain of how many people have traditionally understood style in writing. For years, style has often been seen as the extra flourish one adds after the content is done, as if it's something ornamental, aesthetic, peripheral to the message itself. But in truth, style is central to communication. It is not simply how we say something, it is how we ensure something can be understood at all. In a world increasingly dominated by fragmented attention spans and the deluge of information, clarity is not just a courtesy, it's a necessity. And clarity comes not from dressing up our ideas, but from stripping them down to their most intelligible and vivid forms. The misuse of style as embellishment is a leftover from outdated traditions of rhetoric, where verbosity was often mistaken for intellect and where style was aligned with pomp. In contrast, the 21st century reader demands efficiency, transparency, and above all, purpose in prose. Writers today must understand that clarity does not mean dullness. Clarity, when executed well, carries elegance of its own. It is in the well-structured sentence, the apt metaphor, the sharp verb that replaces a flabby phrase. To write with clarity is to respect the reader's time and intelligence. It is to avoid the lazy traps of inflated language, clichés, and buzzwords that clog the arteries of communication. Often, the impulse to obscure meaning in complex sentences or jargon stems from insecurity. The writer fears being seen as simplistic, so they reach for complexity. But complexity is not sophistication. Clarity can be hard-won, demanding of the writer a deep understanding of the topic and a disciplined attention to structure and word choice. It is much easier to ramble and decorate than it is to refine. Style, when wielded in the service of clarity, becomes an instrument of power. It allows the writer to guide the reader through their argument or story with precision, revealing each idea in its proper order, and supporting it with language that is both functional and engaging. Modern writing, particularly in academic, bureaucratic, or technical fields, often violates this principle. It hides meaning behind walls of abstraction. This tendency undermines the very function of language, which is to bridge minds. When style is misused, when sentences are engineered for prestige rather than precision, the result is not respect, but confusion. A clear writer does not fear being understood, they aim for it. They do not hide behind passive voice, nominalizations, or tangled syntax. They know that a well-placed comma can change the rhythm of a paragraph, and that rhythm itself is part of style. Clarity is not just about shorter sentences or smaller words. It's about structure. It's about giving the reader the cues they need to follow the line of reasoning without being distracted by unnecessary complexity. It's also about empathy. A writer who values clarity is a writer who considers the reader. They anticipate confusion before it arises. They know when a term needs to be defined, when a shift in argument needs a signal, and when an example will illuminate an abstract point. They revise not to make things sound fancier, but to make things more digestible. The clearest writing often requires the most rewriting. One draft may contain the ideas, but it rarely arranges them for impact. Each pass through the text sharpens the focus, cuts redundancy, and polishes awkwardness. Clarity is a discipline, a muscle that grows with practice. In this light, style is not ornamental, it is structural. Just as the design of a building affects how people move through it, the design of a sentence affects how ideas move through the mind. Style guides the reader, gently or forcefully, through thoughts, emotions, and evidence. The notion that style should be invisible is also misleading. Style doesn't disappear in clarity, it integrates. A good style has a voice. It may be crisp, wry, warm, urgent, but it always serves the goal of making the writer's intention accessible. In this way, clarity and personality are not intention. The writer's presence should not obscure meaning but enhance it. This is what it means to write with clarity as style, to let the personality of the mind emerge, not the ego of the writer. Clarity also benefits from a strong sense of rhythm and pacing. Sentences are not just containers of data, they are movements of thought. The length, flow, and transitions between sentences create momentum. The well-placed pause or the strategic repetition can do more for clarity than a dozen overused adjectives. Style at the service of clarity respects the pace at which readers process information. It uses formatting, paragraph breaks, and visual cues to anchor the reader in the unfolding logic of the text. This kind of writing does not attempt to impress with complexity, but to impress through connection. When the reader understands the argument, sees the structure, and feels the intent, the writer has succeeded. This is particularly important in the 21st century, where communication competes not just with other texts, but with entire ecosystems of distractions. Clarity-oriented style ensures that the writer's message cuts through. Whether writing a blog post, a research article, or a political speech, the goal is the same: transmission of meaning with as little distortion as possible. This does not mean dumbing down the content. It means raising the standard of explanation. It means demanding more from ourselves as thinkers, so we can demand less from readers as decoders. This reversal of effort, putting the burden on the writer, not the reader, is the ethical stance behind clarity. It aligns with the values of accessibility, democracy, and inclusion in public discourse. Writers who understand this will avoid the performance of intelligence in favor of the delivery of insight. They will resist the academic urge to wrap every sentence in caveats and qualifiers that strangle the core message. They will write as if their audience matters, because it does. Whether teaching, persuading, or storytelling, the writer's success depends on being understood. Style that clarifies makes this possible. It becomes the invisible scaffolding holding the ideas aloft, allowing the reader to see the structure without being distracted by it. The challenge, then, is not to write beautifully for its own sake, but to write in a way that beauty and clarity emerge together, each reinforcing the other through deliberate and thoughtful craft. Good writing reflects structured, critical thinking. The misconception that writing is merely the transcription of ideas onto paper has led many to overlook how deeply writing is intertwined with cognition itself. Writing is not just a vehicle for ideas, it is often the means by which those ideas are formed, refined, and tested. The process of writing forces the mind to slow down, to unpack vague impressions, to examine logic, to confront contradiction, and to make connections explicit. Every clause, every sentence, every transition demands a decision. These decisions accumulate into coherence. Coherence is not accidental. It is the result of critical thought organized and clarified by the act of writing. To write well, one must think well. But that kind of thinking is not a passive experience. It is active, deliberate, effortful. It resists the fog of assumption. It challenges the comfort of intuition. And good writing is the product that emerges from this struggle. When we read a well-structured argument or narrative, we are witnessing the residue of this effort. The structure of a text mirrors the architecture of thought. Paragraphs become the articulation of steps in reasoning. Topic sentences offer orientation. Transitions show causality or contrast. The organization is not merely formal, it is cognitive. A poorly structured piece of writing signals a mind that has not worked through the complexity of its ideas. Rambling, incoherence, redundancy, these are not simply stylistic flaws, they are failures in thinking. Conversely, tight prose, where every sentence builds on the previous one and paves the way for the next, reflects mental clarity. This is why the revision process is so essential. The first draft is often a confrontation between the writer and a murky idea. Through the painful labor of reordering, rephrasing, and rethinking, clarity emerges. The writer gains not just a better sentence, but a better grasp of the idea itself. This reciprocal relationship between writing and thinking reveals itself in multiple domains. In academia, students who cannot write coherent essays often do not fully understand the material. In public discourse, a policy argument riddled with vagueness and euphemism usually hides a lack of rigor. In journalism, clarity of writing signals clarity of investigation. When someone can explain a complex subject in simple, direct prose, it usually means they understand it deeply. This ability to distill, to summarize without distortion, to anticipate counterarguments, all of it reveals a disciplined mind. Style that favors precision and order over embellishment becomes the visible sign of this mental discipline. Even in creative writing, where imagination and ambiguity have their place, structure remains indispensable. A novelist's ability to develop character, theme, and plot across hundreds of pages relies on the same mental faculties required for a tightly reasoned essay: pattern recognition, logical sequencing, attention to detail, and revision. Writers who are aware of this relationship will treat writing not just as expression, but as exploration. They will recognize that putting thoughts into words is an opportunity to discover what they actually believe or understand. Often, what seems like a strong conviction dissolves under the pressure of having to put it into coherent prose. The fuzziness of unarticulated thoughts cannot survive the demands of writing. This is a virtue. It protects us from self-deception. The writer, when forced to be specific, either strengthens the idea or abandons it. Either outcome represents intellectual progress. It is why writing is central to education and inquiry. It is not simply a tool to communicate findings, it is a method of inquiry in itself. As we write, we must define terms, draw distinctions, justify claims, and address objections. Each of these steps refines the thought process. Critical thinking is not just about asking questions, it is about assembling answers in a coherent framework. Writing imposes that framework. It requires not only the generation of ideas, but their organization and evaluation. The best writing often comes from those who are constantly testing their own assumptions, who anticipate the questions a skeptical reader might ask, and who structure their prose to respond to these challenges. This is not an easy process, but it is a necessary one. The reader's comprehension depends on it. If the writer has not done the work of sorting through complexity, the burden shifts to the reader. The result is confusion, misinterpretation, or disengagement. Writing that reflects structured thinking spares the reader this burden. It says, I have done the work so you don't have to wade through my confusion. I have thought this through so you can understand it easily. In the professional world, this principle becomes especially important. In business, science, law, and government, decisions depend on clear communication. Memos, briefs, reports, and proposals are more than formalities. They are arguments with real-world consequences. When these documents are vague, bloated, or disorganized, they signal sloppy reasoning. Worse, they invite misinterpretation. Precision in writing prevents costly misunderstandings. Clarity supports accountability. It shows that the writer is not only competent but trustworthy. The ability to write well in professional settings is therefore not a luxury, it is a demonstration of value. It reflects an ability to take complexity and render it accessible, to take competing priorities and reconcile them in a coherent plan. It reveals leadership through communication. Writing well is thinking clearly on the record. Even in informal contexts, emails, presentations, internal memos, the same principles apply. The quality of thinking behind communication shapes relationships, trust, and outcomes. A disorganized email suggests a disorganized mind. A clear message saves time and improves collaboration. In an era of remote work and global teams, the written word often replaces the spoken one. This makes the demand for clarity even more urgent. Ambiguity in writing can no longer be patched up with a follow-up conversation or a reassuring tone of voice. The text must stand alone. It must speak for the writer when they are not there. The more structured the thinking behind it, the more reliable the communication. This is also why writing should be taught not just as a skill, but as a mode of thinking. Students at all levels benefit when they see writing as a cognitive exercise, not just a performance. When teachers focus solely on grammar and mechanics, without engaging students in the process of argumentation, they miss the point. Writing instruction should begin with thinking instruction. What is the claim? What is the evidence? What is the structure? Only after these questions are answered should style enter the conversation. Without this foundation, the stylistic flourishes amount to little more than decoration on a weak scaffold. Writers must earn their metaphors, their tone, their rhythm, by first ensuring that their ideas have integrity. This kind of training builds not only better writers, but better thinkers. It cultivates habits of reasoning, skepticism, clarity, and empathy. Because good writing is not just about self-expression. It is about constructing an experience for someone else. It is about guiding another mind through a path of logic or feeling with care, coherence, and respect. Modern prose must resist jargon and embrace simplicity. In an era saturated with information, where professional and academic discourses are increasingly specialized, the temptation to hide behind technical vocabulary, inflated phrases, and abstract generalities has never been stronger. Yet this trend undermines the essential function of language to connect. Jargon erects barriers between writer and reader. It signals exclusion, not understanding. It says, this is for insiders only. When writing becomes a coded language for a select few, it ceases to communicate and begins to perform. It performs allegiance to a group, a discipline, or a trend rather than prioritizing clarity and comprehension. The consequence is a growing gap between knowledge and the public, between institutions and individuals, between expertise and accessibility. Simplicity, on the other hand, is not about dumbing things down, it's about sharpening them up. It demands a higher level of mastery, not a lower one. Anyone can copy and paste jargon. Only someone who truly understands a subject can explain it simply and precisely. This is why simplicity in writing is a moral and intellectual stance. It reflects a commitment to making ideas accessible. It values the reader's time, attention, and capacity to engage. Writers who aim for simplicity do not assume ignorance in their audience, they assume curiosity. They invite people into a conversation rather than lecturing from a pedestal. The challenge lies in balancing precision with approachability. Some topics do require technical terms, but even then, those terms must be introduced carefully and framed with clarity. The key is to distinguish between necessary specificity and unnecessary complexity. When a term of art is unavoidable, the writer should define it, use it consistently, and illustrate it with concrete examples. This is not just a courtesy, it is an act of intellectual transparency. It tells the reader, I am not hiding behind this word. I want you to follow along. Unfortunately, much of the writing produced in professional and academic circles rewards opacity. Dense writing is often mistaken for rigorous thought. Authors worry that if their prose is too clear, it might seem too simple, and therefore not worthy of scholarly respect. But this conflates complexity of subject with complexity of presentation. True intellectual rigor is not about how difficult a text is to decipher. It's about how deeply it investigates, how coherently it argues, and how responsibly it communicates. Writing in a convoluted style does not make ideas stronger. It often masks weaknesses in logic, gaps in evidence, or a lack of confidence. Simplicity requires the writer to be honest about what they know and what they don't. It invites scrutiny. Jargon often deflects it. There's a reason why so much bureaucratic language is unintelligible. It's designed to obscure responsibility. The more abstract the phrase, the easier it is to avoid clear claims or promises. Simplicity resists this. It demands that the writer say what they mean and mean what they say. Modern audiences are acutely sensitive to this difference. With so many competing demands on attention, they will not endure prose that feels evasive, inflated, or self-important. Whether scrolling through a news article, reading a product manual, or analyzing a political op-ed, readers are scanning for clarity. They want to know what's at stake, what the point is, and why it matters. Writers who meet that expectation with simplicity gain trust. They signal credibility not just by what they say, but by how they say it. They recognize that effective communication is not a performance of intelligence. It is an expression of respect. Respect for language, for truth, and for the reader's willingness to engage. When writers reject jargon and embrace simplicity, they transform writing into a tool of connection rather than separation. The internet has only made this imperative stronger. In digital spaces, where prose competes with images, videos, hyperlinks, and comment sections, the burden of clarity rests even more heavily on the sentence. People do not have the patience for labyrinthine paragraphs filled with unnecessary qualifiers and obscure terminology. Simplicity in this context becomes not only a stylistic choice but a survival strategy. It allows ideas to travel across platforms, audiences, and cultures. It adapts writing for the speed and scope of the digital age without sacrificing depth or nuance. A writer who embraces simplicity in this environment is not conceding to ignorance. They are elevating their own message. They are choosing communication over posturing. This is how good ideas reach people and how those people carry those ideas forward. The same is true in education. Students are often taught to imitate complex language before they've grasped the ideas it's meant to express. The result is writing that sounds sophisticated but says very little. Teachers who model simple, strong prose give students the tools to develop real understanding. They help students see that clarity is not the enemy of depth, but its ally. When students learn to write clearly, they also learn to think clearly. They learn to break down concepts, to structure arguments, and to express uncertainty without confusion. They stop hiding behind the illusion of difficulty and start facing the challenge of truth. In this way, simplicity becomes a foundation not only for better writing but for better learning. This principle also applies in fields that seem, at first glance, to require technical language. Medicine, law, engineering, science. All of these rely on specialized vocabulary. But that does not mean their practitioners should write in impenetrable prose. On the contrary, the more complex the content, the greater the responsibility to explain it clearly. This is especially true when these fields intersect with public policy or public safety. When a doctor explains a diagnosis, or a scientist discusses climate change, or a lawyer outlines a constitutional argument, clarity is not optional, it is essential. The stakes are high. Misunderstanding can have real consequences. Writers in these domains must remember that the audience is not always their peers. The clarity they bring to their writing determines whether the public can act on knowledge or remain confused by it. Even in art and literature, simplicity plays a central role. Poets, novelists, and essayists all benefit from the discipline of choosing the right word, trimming the fat, and building tension through precise control of language. Some of the most powerful writing in history has been simple, even sparse. Simplicity here is not about minimalism for its own sake. It is about making every word count. It is about trusting that the idea, the emotion, the rhythm of the sentence will carry more weight than a thesaurus full of fancy synonyms. Great stylists are often the clearest writers. They may bend the rules, but they never lose the reader. They understand that complexity lies in the meaning, not the surface. They do not confuse opacity with mystery or verbosity with beauty. The call to resist jargon and embrace simplicity is ultimately a call to return to the roots of what writing is supposed to do: to share, to teach, to persuade, to provoke, to move. These aims require more than vocabulary. They require vision. Simplicity is not a reduction but a distillation. It is the process of refining raw thought into something potent, memorable, and useful. It is an act of discipline, of empathy, of courage. It is a choice to make writing not a fortress, but a bridge.